Yeah, we're about to begin the webinar, Everything You Need to Know About the Paladin Purchase Order Module and Features, Part 2. Welcome, everybody. My name is Charles Owen. I'll be your host for the day. And we've got a few slides to go through, probably going to be about 25 minutes, I'm guessing, to go through this. If you haven't already seen the first Part 1 of the Purchase Order Potpourri, I recommend that you do watch that because this is kind of a continuation on that. So I am recording this. You'll be able to see this as of probably later this afternoon. And we will go ahead and get started here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go over a brief review from part 1. I'll just go over just some highlights. And then also we'll get into the setup options and PO configuration. And beyond that, we'll go into applying freight charges, both for PO invoices during the receiving process and also during the EDI invoice process, how to add instructions, what that looks like, how instructions are displayed on the PO. We'll show a screen on that. And confirming the PO screen note field, we'll kind of take a look at that. And we'll get into setting up individual supplier costs. Supplier costs both when you're creating invoices and when you're receiving those. And then we'll go into the purchase order importer, which I'm excited about. So let's go ahead and get started here. So just a quick review from last time. So this is the agenda from last part 1, the advantages of using POs in Paladin. We talked about it's the most logical, practical, easy, and best method for receiving and managing your inventory. It's the most effective method for tracking your purchases and managing your stock on hand. It enhances the order and receiving efficiencies and improves supplier order communications for both EDI vendors and non-EDI vendors or electronic data interchange vendors. And we also talked about the various methods of creating POs, the suggested order report, of course, being the holy grail of the system, where it's the automated ordering that is really going to get you your best stock on hand that is going to be most accurate, so you'll have less products out of stock and more of the products that you're ordering in stock. Item sold report, it's a replenishment ordering. That's another way that you can create a purchase order using the RF gun or terminal. When you walk around your store, you can shoot for outs. That can create a PO. You can manually enter POs or orders into the point of sale or the PO system. That's what I call want list ordering or as on-demand ordering. And then special order PO creation. So if you're creating a special order, you can just click a button and create a PO for those special order items. Same holds true with all the invoice and quote invoices that you have. You can just click a button, right click, and you'll see create a PO, and you can create a PO for any or all items in that PO or on that invoice, I should say. And then also PO importing, which we are going to get into today. Beyond that, we went into creating, confirming, and sending POs, recalling and sending a stored PO, receiving a manual PO, receiving an EDI PO. So that's both the electronic and the manual process. And then resending an open PO to suppliers. And then more importantly, the last thing we talked about was merging stored POs. So consolidating those POs to meet your minimums. All right. So the first slide here that we're going to talk about on part 2 is setting up some setup options in the PO configuration. Now this isn't all of them. This is just a few of them, but these are some of the most important ones. So if in Paladin, if you go to File, Setup, Company tab on the very top of the screen, and you select the Purchase Orders pane, you'll see this group of items here, checkboxes. The first one is Fixed Margin Pricing. What that is if you check this box, it says Update Retail Pricing based on receiving cost and reference margin, will automatically change your retail price as your costs change. This is not common for a lot of stores to use. It's great for commodity items. We do have some stores that do use it across the board. They want this system to figure out a certain margin or markup that they wish to apply whenever they receive a new cost, whether it be higher or lower. And you can actually incorporate any type of rounding if you wanted to as well. Second one on there is default distribution of freight by either cost or weight. You can set that one accordingly. Most people do it by cost. And then force PO receive cost to market cost. This is an option that I recommend. It's not required, but it is nice to have a current market cost that comes from the last time you received a purchase order. And then disable automatic printing of POs. If you don't like the PO printed every time you create a PO, you can turn that off and just make it on demand. And then display manufacturer part numbers. This is an option that several stores have opted to go for. Obviously, they're not doing dual EDI or electronic data interchange, because when you do, the part number writes over the field where your secondary supplier would be. So it's not recommended for those that have dual EDI or even triple EDI, but it is a feature that if people want, they can have. And then lastly, force credit PO balance to AR. What does this mean? Well, this means if you have a credit balance for a supplier or for another store or for anybody for that matter, you can have it to where it automatically runs the statements for that, or it maintains a balance on your accounts receivables to say that is a payable that or a receivable that you need to be aware of. And this way you won't lose track. And this is kind of a cool little feature. If you're not using this, it is something that is available to you. Applying freight to PO invoices during the receiving process. So this gets into how do I add my freight costs. So you just go into Paladin and go to the PO module, select F5 PO receive mode. You'll select or find that PO, and you can select an open PO and press F12 to open it up. So on the bottom of the screen, you'll see on the right-hand side here, we have find receive mode and find PO. So those are the two buttons, the F5 and then the F6. And that'll take you right to the open POs. And at that point, you just select the one you want, press the F12 open button, and that will pop up the contents of what is in that purchase order. After that, you select F8 to process it, and then F1 to process it a second time, or just a verification button, if you will, and that will spawn this box to pop up. This is the apply freight cost window. It will appear, and you may enter the freight cost here and click F8, okay. And what this does is the freight costs at this point have now been applied to the cost of goods sold based on item costs. That's all there is to adding freight. Now there is an ability to add freight to a received EDI invoice. So if you electronically receive your invoices from your supplier and they just automatically come down and get loaded and updated on your system, you can go by after that fact and you can actually apply freight costs to that order. Now this is recommended within minutes of receiving the invoice. If you can't do it within minutes, there might be some discrepancies on quantity stock on hand that those item costs may not be distributed appropriately throughout the items if you don't still have all the items in stock. So just be wary of that. A lot of people don't even manage the freight cost in their order. That's a separate event. That's a separate accounting event that they manage separate of the actual invoice. But to do it, just go to your inventory mode. You select the F9 or EDI button at the bottom of the inventory screen. There's another button that pops up, says reporting. Click on the reporting button, and in there, in the EDI reporting window, the invoices that are eligible will show a red X icon to the right of the freight column, or right under the freight column. And you just highlight it, and down below there's a button that says apply freight. It's that simple. Then you just add the cost of the freight and you are done. Let's look at adding instructions to a purchase order. I don't know if many of you do this, but it is a nice feature to have. You can put things like terms and notes or bill to and that sort of thing. So we're going to go through and we're going to look at what it takes to create the various instructions, how to apply the instructions to a specific supplier, and then adding instructions to the purchase order. Those are the 3 steps in the process. First one is you go to the File Setup Company tab, And under the purchase orders pane, you'll see this box here. It's actually going to see a lot more, but I've cut everything off on the top and bottom. This is just an excerpt of that window. But I'm showing here that we have 4 payment bill tos, 4 bill freight tos, and 4 ship via. So here you can enter the information you want. You might have, you might fill in 1, 2, or all 4 spots. Either way, it's up to you, but you do not have to fill in all of the boxes. You can leave as many blank as you like. Once you create that, now the next thing we have to do is add those to the supplier specific instructions, or we add the instructions to the supplier. And we do that in the same area. You go to File Setup, and this time instead of selecting the Company tab, you select the Supplier tab. And if you notice in the Supplier tab, you'll have, this will be on your screen, maybe midway down, you'll see the PO terms. And this is where you have the drop-down boxes. The drop-down boxes, if you right-click on any of the payment bill to or bill freight to or ship via, it will show you the selection choices that you've added to your configuration. That was the prior screen. So if you have items to select, just go ahead and put them in here. You can fill all or one or none, it's okay. And then notice that the purchase order supplier instructions are optional, do not need to be set for every supplier. Once you've got this information in here, go ahead and click Save and Close. Now you'll see at the bottom there it says Confirm PO Screen Note Field. We're going to go through that in a minute. Now adding instructions to the purchase order. So this is the third step in the process. 1, create the instructions. 2, apply the instructions to the specific suppliers. 3, now you're creating a purchase order and you're going to select a supplier, and based on the supplier instructions, it'll automatically come up with those pieces of information. So you just go to the PO, enter, select a supplier at the top, add items into your purchase order, click buy, and once you do, the default instructions will be auto filled in and it will display this box for you. If you want to change any of these things, you're welcome to do that. In this case, if you wanted to change the ship via, what I've done, I've shown here is a diagram here. I've just hit that drop down box and you can now select a different vendor to do the shipments. So that can be done right during the PO creation and process. All right, how they look is this is how the instructions look. They're right in the body of the invoice, or the purchase order rather, and you can see the bill to, bill freight to, ship via, and you've got all the information right there in the header of the purchase order, which gets sent to your vendor. Here's what I mentioned, the confirm PO screen note field. So I blew up this box again on the right-hand side where it shows the instructions. I added some specific instructions for this particular supplier that I was on. It is supplier specific where you can put the terms. In this case, I just said minimum order is $1,200 or a service charge will apply of $300. So that's kind of just a message to the procurement agent or the person doing the ordering to say, hey, look, if we're not meeting this minimum, we gotta go ahead and add some more items to it. Or maybe we have 2 or 3 of these purchase orders in the system. We need to merge them together for the same supplier. All of these things are possible with Paladin. But this is the note that pops up, and it is for the person that is submitting the purchase order. It's very similar to the customer message. When you do checkout with the customer, it also shows on the screen. This is exactly that feature for creating orders. Well, here's one that you may or may not be participating in. This is the setting up individual supplier costs for items on POs. When this feature is turned on, the supplier costs are used for the purchase order instead of the default market cost in the inventory. How to turn this on? You just go to File Setup, Company tab. On the bottom of the purchase orders pane, it says Use Supplier Table Costs for Ordering. You check that box, click Save and Close, and it's activated. And here's what happens. It's really cool. So when you do this, you're actually able to create a unique supplier market cost and have that come up when you're both creating purchase orders as well as receiving purchase orders. And what happens is you just go into the PO module, you enter a supplier, add an item to the purchase order, and if a supplier cost is a defined cost for this supplier, meaning there is a cost in the supplier market cost slot that's there under suppliers and inventory, then it will be used as the item cost. So you'll see here the $23.99 represented on the supplier window in the inventory is now shown. That same cost is shown when creating a PO for that particular supplier. Now, what if you change suppliers? Well, it's going to change the cost potentially. So here, if a supplier market cost is not defined or is 0, and you can see the association of 1 in the blue to number 1 in the supplier window down below here. If it's 0, then the default cost is used, right? So the default cost is set to the first set to the first non-zero value in the list of values on the pricing tab in the inventory module under the item cost pane. So follow along here. So the next in line, if there were no individual supplier market cost in the supplier window that was set to 0, it's going to then just go after the market cost in your inventory. And that market cost may or may not be the last cost, depending on how you set that up. If market cost is 0 and there's nothing in there for market cost, it will default then to the last cost. If the product had never been purchased and all you have is an average cost, then it defaults to the average cost. So that's kind of the priority. If there's no supplier market cost, it defaults to the inventory market cost. If there's no inventory market cost, defaults to the last cost. If there's no last cost and it's never been ordered and received, then it will default to the average cost. All right. Now, one thing to note here, if you change suppliers after you've added items to the purchase order, cost will adjust to the current supplier. Well, that's because you selected that option. And we can see that in this next window. So here we have the supplier costs are being applied for no supplier in the first example up there with the first blue arrow. We have not selected a supplier, so it's defaulting to the market cost that's in the inventory. Now, the second window below that, the middle one, shows supplier A as our choice. Well, notice it went from $10.99 on the hammer to $9.99, and then the satin paint went from $10 to $12.99. Now, on this same PO, let's go ahead and do another drop down and select a different supplier. In this case, it's supplier number B. Supplier B has its own set of supplier costs that are tied to the supplier window in the inventory screen. So this enables you to have different costs for different suppliers, which is how we're able to split the purchase order based on the lowest cost supplier or vendor. And we do offer that. That was in part 1 of the creating the POs a few weeks ago. All right. Next, I wish this would update automatically. Well, it does. So update supplier market cost upon EDI receiving event. That's what this feature talks about. So when you are receiving your EDI file maintenance and or invoice upload, it will go ahead and grab that market cost and plug it into the market cost. Will it also plug it into last cost? Sure, if it's it will put it into last cost and potentially move it to market cost and then readjust the average cost. All this happens automatically when you are doing an EDI receiving event. So not only does this happen with the EDI receiving event, but also non-EDI vendors. If you have POs that are in the system that you're just adding into the system and receiving manually into the system, it will also update the market cost or the supplier market cost as well. That's from the PO itself. So it allows manual changing of market cost for both EDI and non-EDI suppliers. And this allows you to have two different market costs for the same suppliers. If you want, you can have one that is set in the supplier market cost, then you can have one that's set in the inventory market cost. I don't know why you would do that, but you may want that if you're working a lot with high commodity items, lumber, copper, building materials, that sort of thing. Okay, so now setting market cost and other order data for individual suppliers. So not only can you change this information upon the EDI receiving event, not only can you change it manually when you're receiving a purchase order, but you can go in at any time into the inventory, select F11 for the supplier tab, and you'll see you can edit the parts supplier data. You can edit up to 4 fields, the order number, which we highly recommend, particularly if you're doing dual EDI, where you have multiple electronic data interchange vendors or suppliers. You need an order number, because otherwise that vendor, when you're ordering from supplier number 2, 1, 2, 3, or 4, or 5, you may, you'll want to have their order number so they can associate exactly what item you are wanting to order. Order numbers are put in here, and this is done normally with the when we do when we set a store live, we'll grab all this information and plug it in, and then you can go ahead and maintain this information once that's in there. You have the ability to change not only the market cost, but also the order number, the order quantity, minimum order quantity, and the instructions for broken carton. So those are all visible and available to make adjustments to. You may also add additional suppliers and incorporate those same values. So in this case, if we wanted to add a new supplier to this item, we just go into the supplier list, select a supplier, and click add. It's that simple. So to get there again, you just go in your inventory, select number F11, or press the suppliers button. That'll bring up the edit parts supplier data window, and then you can just, with the drop down, select another vendor and add another supplier to this list. And at that time, you can adjust the cost. All right, so this last section that we're going into is on purchase order importer. And I'm going to run through this pretty quickly, but we are running out of time. We're getting just a couple of minutes away from what I promised. And here, you have the ability to automatically import a list of items and create pending purchase orders for active inventory items. You can then confirm them, buy them, and receive these purchase orders quickly and efficiently. The PO importer is useful for a lot of things, but two in particular. One is it automates the time-consuming task of manually updating the inventory items that were received outside of the normal purchasing process, such as from a trade show, manufacturer special promotion, or non-EDI vendors that are willing to email invoices as attached files. Secondly, you can get a long list of items from your supplier, and you can determine through this importer feature which items are carried in the store and which ones are not. This is fantastic for this. This process works really easily and nicely, and it automates the whole process. So for these two reasons, the importer is a very, very useful tool. How to get into it? Just go to Maintain Data Viewer in the top of your screen. You're going to select the Purchase Orders tab, and within there, you're going to click the Import tab. You'll notice on this window, on the far right-hand side, it says Export File Template, and then it has the button Export. It's kind of fuzzy, but I think we can read that. If you click that export button, it will give you a sample template, and that can either be Excel or it can be text-based or tab delimited. You just click on the export based on which format you have chosen, and it will show you this information. So it's going to show you for Excel, there are 4 columns: part number, supplier number, quantity, and cost. If you're bringing in an invoice from one supplier, then of course that supplier would be the same all the way down in that column. But if you're bringing in multiple invoices, which you have the ability to import multiple invoices if you want for suppliers. The second one to the right with the yellow header shows the tab delimiter. It's just same information. It's just using tabs to delimit between the columns. The only information we need are these 4 columns: part number, supplier number, cost, and quantity. Not necessarily in that order, quantity and cost. And once you have this and you upload this into the system through the import, it's just like magic. It just creates a pending purchase order. Let's go ahead and continue on here. So to do this process, once you've created the item information file, it's formatted and completed, save it and close it. Then you go into import, select the ellipsis, you identify your file, and then it will, then you just click the open and process, and it will process this file. Items in the file will be added to the pending purchase order only when they match the active inventory items in Paladin. What about those other items? How do I know what came in and what didn't come in? Well, I've got a list here. It shows you on the bottom, says created 2 pending purchase orders, 2 lines were skipped. Well, what does that mean? Well, if you go back and you recall that file, the file that you created or your vendor created, we add another column, a 5th column that says status. And in this case, the 2 that were skipped were items that are not in their active inventory. Can you add them? Sure, you can take this if you want, use the importer for inventory importer, and you can add these items in. Of course, they're going to need a little bit more information, but that's a possibility as well. But the reason for this is to show you what inventory items are on your purchase order and which ones were skipped. Now, how do you receive them? Well, you first have to hit the confirm and buy, and then you can receive them as you normally do. For EDI suppliers, these items will be automatically received through the EDI process. For non-EDI suppliers, once you go into the PO module and you go to PO mode, receive PO, then you can receive these delivered items all in one fell swoop. It's pretty nice. All right. Well, guys, that covers it. We're in this thing about 27 minutes, only a couple minutes behind schedule here. We have information. If you just go to the search for purchase orders in the KBA and also in the webinars, you'll see that there is lots of material to choose from on purchase orders. There's a lot to them. There's a lot to do with a lot of options that you have when you're ordering and receiving. The next webinar, I have a save the date because we haven't actually determined what the next content will be. We're kind of tossing around a few ideas. If you have any, go ahead and put them in the comments section or question section. And I do thank you. There is a question in here, and it's a great question. There's a couple of them actually, so we'll go through that. Don't forget to save that date on March 12th. So the first question is, why can't the freight be included in the total final printed purchase order? It actually, if you go back and print that PO after you've selected the freight will be a line item on that PO or on that invoice. And the other question is, why can't the freight be included in oh, that is the same one. Yeah, so that should answer that. And then, will there ever be a discount or fee or box added to apply freight box? So if you want to add a discount, so if they say, all right, with your order, we're giving you $100 off because we're just nice people and you deserve it. So you can put in a negative freight if you want to receive it that way. That is not the best practice. The best practice would be to just make that notation in your accounting system. But if you want to incorporate it in and have it reflected in reduce your cost of goods sold, that's a possibility as well. Great. Those are the only questions I have. I thank you so much for your time. As always, appreciate you guys attending these webinars. It just tells me that you are really interested in really streamlining your operations and finding out as much about Paladin as possible. There's a lot to this product. Although it's a simple to use and product, there is a lot of depth to it, and you can do a lot of stuff with it. And we're always putting new features in, which we will do on these webinars as well. We'll share that information. There's Retail Science you can go to find out relevant articles and such. The portal.paladinpos.com enables you to get into the help menu without even being logged into Paladin. You can do it from home or anywhere. You can watch webinars, training videos, and the like. Thank you so much for your time. Be safe. God bless. And until next time, see ya.